Welcome to another episode of Morning Mojo with me, Shane Solomon. Super excited to welcome Zane onto the sofa today. So we're talking burnout. Have you ever experienced that? Are you going through it right now? A man who knows about this is Zane. So burnout, talk to me, Zane. What is it?
Burnout. Yes. Quite a cherry subject for a morning to start with. But yeah, so burnout is something I think everyone's had some sort of experience with on some sort of level. I find that when I'm talking about it, inevitably people want to come up to me and speak about their experience of it and how they dealt with it or haven't dealt with it. And I think the best way to describe burnout is it's at the moment the World Health Organization have classified it as sort of chronic workplace stress that hasn't been properly managed. And I think it's probably due for a little bit of an upgrade. At the moment, there's a lot of focus on workplace stress, but I would argue that it's more to do with just stress in general. So life stress, personal stress, professional stress, family stress, all encompassing sort of coming in under the same umbrella with it now.
And stress really is a killer. It's a nasty thing, isn't it? And it's something that we're all experiencing at some stage or another, but it's how you manage it, I guess, really. And you specialize in that and helping people with that. And can you give any kind of examples, obviously not mentioning any names, but people you've worked with and how you start about that process? Because there'll be people listening to this, people watching this, and go, do you know what, I'm burnt out. I feel like I'm burnt out. I can relate to what this guy's saying.
Yeah, the big thing to understand about stress is that everyone's situation is personal to them. At the moment, there's a lot of focus on stuff that's going on at work, but work is only half of your life, if that. And what can happen is you can have people within the same work environment and exposed to the same stresses. One is fine, and one really starts struggling. That can just be due with everything else that's going on in their life. So really, the first thing I do when I sit down and talk to guys and girls is just work out exactly what's going on, not just what's going on at work, but what's going on at home as well. What's been building up, what's not been building up, and get a real picture from that.
Now, of course, this podcast is all about inspiring people and making people start the day in 20 minutes through our wonderful podcast platform. How do you start your day, Zane?
I'd love to be able to tell you that I'm up at 5, jumping in ice baths and the rest of it, but that's not the case. What I do try and do is get up at the same time every morning, which is usually around 7 o'clock, and up and out of bed. There's a lot of research going in now around sleep, and I'll touch that a little bit later on when we talk about sort of the rest component to managing your stress. But sleep is obviously a really big deal. And what we're looking at now is moving away from looking at a certain amount of hours every night to the regularity of those hours. So not worrying so much about getting 7 or 8 hours, but when that is. So about waking up and going to sleep at the same time. So for me, 7 o'clock, up and get moving. We're creatures of habit. Half the things we do in our lives are through habit. So if we can get those habits sort of embedded early, it just makes things a lot easier. So for me, up at 7, it's usually the same sort of breakfast. It's usually a bit of porridge with a bit of yogurt and some fresh fruit, and of course a coffee. No brains before beans.
No, sleep is huge. It's a huge thing, and it's one of those things I've always struggled with because I'm a creative, a thinker. I have a hard job switching off, and to get those kind of hours consistent is certainly something I need to work harder on, because sometimes I could go to bed at 12, sometimes 1 in the morning. Very rarely do I go, to bed at say 9, 10 o'clock or things like that. Which when I have done it, it's great. The benefits are huge. So yeah, sleep's a massive thing. So your inspirations growing up then, now you've had a career in the police, you've had a sporting kind of career as well. What was your inspirations growing up? Were you very inspired early on, or did it take a while to kick in?
I think it probably took a while to kick in. I had quite a, I'll probably guess by the accent, it's not a local accent, brought up in New Zealand on a farm. So I had quite a typical 80s upbringing, very outdoorsy, sort of all over the place with the access to the outdoors that we had in New Zealand. So a lot of the stuff that I see now that I wish my kids would have had available, I took for granted. So I think in that regard, I was very, very lucky, and having all those opportunities first. So yeah, then coming to the UK, what it really gave me a sense of was that I needed to be trying to keep some sort of that in my life as well once I'm here.
Okay, so How to develop mental fitness, in your opinion? How would you...
The key to developing our mental fitness is to make sure that you're not waiting until you need it. It's like any sort of fitness. You wouldn't sign up for a marathon and then start training a week out. You've got to be making sure that you're getting the reps in now. And it's about just doing the things, doing the hard things now, so that when you need them, they're a lot easier. So when we talk about resilience, sort of mental fortitude, the biggest thing with resilience is that you're a lot more resilient when you are well rested. So it's about just being very aware of how you are, how your moods are, and making sure that you're looking after yourself, so that you're not sort of degrading it, and that when you need it, it's there.
And how do you keep going with this? We all know that we need to be doing things and starting now and just taking little steps, but how do we keep motivated to do these things? I started swimming before lockdown and I was doing really well, lost like a stone. I was doing really well. And then the pandemic hit and the swimming pool that I used closed down. Yep. And so now the nearest swimming pool to me is probably about 25 minutes away. And I've just put it off. And and I know I should be doing something, but it's like, how do we motivate ourselves?
Yeah, that's not an unusual story. The pandemic just changed everything for a lot of people, didn't it? And I think you've touched on a really good word there. You talk about motivation, and what we want to be doing is not relying on motivation. We need to be relying on discipline if we're going to be getting the reps in day after day after day, and that comes down to habit forming. And the biggest tip I'd give you is, don't try and change too much. I mean, we've seen that. We've just come off January, so I think it was January 28th. They call it International Quitters Day. I think it's when everyone finally sacks off their morning routines and
the resolution.
Yes, and goes back to how they are. And a big part of what I do with when I'm looking at making some real changes with people's lives is we only focus on changing 1 or 2 things at a time. So if we were looking at making some major changes in someone's life, we wouldn't be looking at doing over 3 months. We'd be looking at doing over 12. And only changing 1 or 2 things, getting those habits embedded so that everything was comfortable, and then slowly adding in changes. And that's the real key to it. Don't try and change too much too quickly. Just focus on 1 or 2 little things, get those in, and then move on once they're comfortable, and you're doing them nice and easily.
Because the benefits are huge, aren't they? Because I know my partner Helen, she's started having a PT, she's going to the gym more, she's feeling better. But it's consistency. It's no different than doing these podcasts every morning at 8 o'clock and being consistent and put that message out to the world that, you've got to get yourself motivated. You've got to take action. You've got to, make the change. If you want things to change, you have to change. I keep saying that wonderful quote, but, you start the change.
Yep. And that's it. And you hit the nail on the head there when take action. Action empowers.
Yeah. And discipline, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, how to amend making poor decisions is one of my notes here on here. What would you say about that?
Oh, it's poor decisions is there's always a good one, isn't it? Because I don't think anyone's in any position to be sitting there and throwing too many stones with all the glass houses that we sit in. But I think as a general rule, it comes down to that mental resilience as well. Just making sure you're in a good place emotionally and mentally. And then because the thing is with resilience, at these times we need to make these decisions, we don't get any sort of notice, do we? So you just need to make sure that when these things do get sprung upon us, that we're in a position, with our health, with our rest, that we are able to make, we're not stressed, and we're able to make decisions without that sort of pressure there. The generic advice is obviously don't make any decisions when you're emotional. Take a moment, step away, let things calm down, and then look at it. But it does go back to making sure that you're in a good place before you're making them. That's probably the key to not making poor decisions.
Maybe a bit of a deep question. This is not on my notes, but what is it all about, Zane? Life. Sum it up for me. We're born, we die. We've got that bit in the middle.
42, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be, it's going to go over anyone's heads now with everything, but I think it is getting out there and making the most of the time that we've got. Because I think if we slip into pause mode, or we slip into sort of into sleep mode, all of a sudden the years start ticking on pretty quickly, don't they? I think it's understanding that we've only got a finite amount of time here, and we need to be making sure that we're maximising our time here. I think which comes down to, again, looking after yourself so that we are able to take advantage of the opportunities when they come up. Yeah.
I mean, my philosophy, my personal one is I tend to not stress too much, because I think, at the end of the day, it's almost like a game, really.
Yeah.
It's one day it will be game over, and I don't like it to sound too negative or too, depressing. But this is the reality. You've got to be real with things, and life happens and things like that. But at the same time, I just try not to stress too much.
Yeah, and that's probably the good news, that no one really cares.
It's like, I might be late paying a bill this week, but who cares? It will happen. Cash flow is going to happen.
Yeah.
Things like that. And just know and trust that everything's going to be all right. I think that's my philosophy. Yeah. People might think, oh, Shane, you're living on a cloud, but how serious is it going to get?
No, and that's it. I think most stress comes from worrying about stuff that hasn't happened yet. And again, it is about taking that step back and just being able to live in the present and appreciate what you've got now, rather than worry about what might or might not happen.
That's right. Live for the now, right?
Yeah.
Live for the now, because, tomorrow's never promised. Anyway, favorite quote. Do you have a favorite quote that stands out to you that you've picked up from a mentor or somewhere along the line, or,
Not so much a mentor, but I just think just get on with it. I think, like I say, live in the present. Sometimes you've just got to step off and take that first step. Action empowers. We can sit there sort of talking around it, but until we actually step out there and start getting on with it, that's when the magic starts happening.
And who inspires you then personally?
I think being a parent probably does that. I think I spoke a little bit just now about time chopping over quite quickly. I mean, my eldest is going into the 6th form next year. It was about 3 years ago that she was starting school. So I think that really gives you a real sense of just how time does march on, and you can't be sort of marking time and taking it for granted.
And then what about moving, from New Zealand to the UK, and it was only meant to be you had a shorter window, you thought, and you've been here for many years now. Making that change back then, that must have been quite a big step. What kind of put your mindset in that frame of mind?
Well, I think, I was 24 and bulletproof, which I think helped. I was, single, came over here, had a couple of friends already over here playing some rugby. So as I said, look, bring your boots over, we can sort you out. So I came over, had sort of 4 or 5 years playing locally here in the Southwest, before, but then planning on heading back to New Zealand after that little adventure. But then met the mother of my children, and here I am, sort of 24 years later, still here.
So what motivation, inspiration did you take from playing rugby that you transform now into your skills in what you do?
I think just that preparation. You can't turn up at pre-season without having done your work and expect results. Especially in the UK, the sporting season's a long season. It's a long winter here, and you need to be making sure that you're maintaining your consistency right throughout the season. It's very easy over here to have 1 or 2 good months, but it's that consistency turning month after month after month. And my last season I was here, I was player coach with a local club here in the Southwest, and that was something I really brought to the role, making sure that we weren't sort of sitting back and resting on the previous month, that we were moving forward. I think that's something that I probably could take from it.
Okay. When you're not working, what do you like to do? What kind of makes you feel good?
I just like getting out. I mean, I'm really lucky living down here in the Southwest. We've got, the beaches, we've got the moors, everything going on. I've got a mountain bike now, so I get out on that. Where I am, I'm really lucky. There's plenty of trails out and about. And it's great. My son, he's young. He's starting to enjoy it as well. So getting out with him now is great. So just try and get outdoors as much as I can at the moment.
So just remind those listening and watching this podcast, what is it you actually do to help people, and how can they get in contact with you?
Okay, so 2 parts to what I do. So there's one-to-one coaching for anyone that's struggling, feels they may need a little bit of help, maybe feel a bit stuck, maybe looking to making any sort of the next steps in their life. So one-to-one coaching around burnout, prevention, and recovery as well. But I also provide webinars and workshops for businesses coming in, speaking to staff, and especially training for managers. what research is finding is that the most impactful point for businesses is managers. If you've got a manager that's struggling, their staff are nearly 3 times more likely to be struggling themselves. So yeah, a lot of the webinars and a lot of the workshops I've got now are focused primarily towards managers and towards anyone that's got supervisory responsibilities or business owners as well.
Sure. So we've literally just gone past the 15-minute part of this podcast, which again, it always flies by. Yeah. Do you have a best motivational life lesson that you can impart to our audience at all?
Absolutely. Just the idea that nobody's coming to save you. The person that you need to get yourself sorted is already there. And that's the person looking at yourself in the mirror every morning, looking back at you. That's who you need to be looking to. I think if we sit back and wait for somebody else to come along and do it for us, we're still going to be waiting when everything's washed up. I think, yeah, that's probably the strongest message I could be giving to people at the moment.
True. And is there anything in general that I've not prompted you for on this podcast that is burning inside you that you thought, actually, Shane, I'd like to impart this bit of knowledge? Or, is there anything that, our viewers or listeners could gain any extra kind of knowledge from Zane at all?
Yeah, just the idea that there's nothing complicated or clever about burnout. It's quite a simple, straightforward process to do with people just becoming exhausted. The one thing I would want to get across is people's understanding about burnout, understanding about the 3 components to it. So there's exhaustion, which is mental and physical, and that's not just exhaustion from a late night. That's months and months and months of just feeling exhausted. We talk about cynicism, when you start getting a bit detached, a bit cynical towards work. Because a big part of what happens with burnout, we haven't got time to go into all the physiological conditions, but it does sort of rob you of yourself. It really affects the part of the brain that looks after your executive function. So that's the part of the brain that deals with your emotions, with your memories, with your rationale, and with that. So what happens is those parts of the brain start to shut down. So you do start becoming quite detached, quite cynical, and not really really worrying too much about what's going on. And the third part is professional capacity, degrading in your capacity. So what it also does is affects the part of the brain that deals with your ability to learn new skills, to take on new environments, and to problem solve. So what you'll find, a real pinch point for people when they're burnt out is if a crisis at work, or if something changes and they have to start adapting and working out from there. That's when they find there's just no capacity to deal with that.
What's the relationship then between burnout and, let's say, mental health? Because that's a big subject at the moment.
It really is. And I have a little bit of an issue with the word mental health. I prefer to think of it as mental fitness. And I think that, my background before I came to the UK is I worked in a psychiatric hospital in New Zealand. I was for a couple of years. So there is a very, very difference between health and illness. And I think with health, it's something that you can be looking after yourself, and you can be taking a lot of steps to make sure that you're keeping yourself well. So I think a lot of the work that I do is about empowerment, is about giving people the information, the tools, the knowledge that they need to keep themselves well, to manage their own mental fitness.
Because it's a huge subject. Yeah. It really is. And I'm fascinated about it. I think, again, it's just the way that my mind works, but I'm very chilled. I'm very laid back with this kind of thing. And although I'm sure I've experienced it somewhere along the line, I'm sure I'm bound to again. It's how you deal with it and things. And I think as time's gone on, we just become more stressful. I think if you went back hundreds of years when we used to walk around the fields and things like that, as opposed to having lovely warm houses, I bet we were less stressed then than we are now.
Well, different stresses. The problem we've got now is that the modern world, there's no off switches anymore. I think I'd argue that, sort of maybe 200 years ago was probably a lot more stressful with, a lot of the threats people faced were quite serious. But they then got to go back indoors in the evening. They had nothing to do. So everything just relaxed. Now, with technology and everything we've got coming in now, we're under constant bombardment at every time. And again, we've only got another minute or so left. But again, I talk a lot about the impact that modern media has on our stress levels. The fact that you talk about not being able to go to sleep till midnight. What are you doing? Are you
on the phone, I'm scrolling. It's terrible.
Yeah, it is.
And I know better.
Yeah, and the whole point with sleep is you need to be making sure that your routines, 3 hours before you're actually going to sleep, you need to be shutting down.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're on the phone just scrolling through, your brain's still firing because you're still, all that stimulus is still coming in. You're still looking at the reels, the stuff that's upsetting you, the stuff that's exciting you, and you're still firing. So again, there's a whole nother talk around sleep sleep discipline and how we manage that as well.
So important. And 3 hours, I'd be lucky if I'm 3 minutes. So there's definitely work to be done there. Yeah. Definitely. Well, Zane, it's been an absolute privilege to have you down here. Thank you so much for making the huge journey from Somerset down here. Have you enjoyed it?
Oh, it's been great. Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's great to have all these people I've not met yet. It's easy to invite people we know, but it's always great to meet new people. We've connected today on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I strongly advise, if you're not already connected to Zane, make sure you do that. The details will be around the podcast and the show notes and things like that. As always, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Megan and to Jay, who's produced the show for us today. I really appreciate them a lot, and I appreciate you, our listeners and viewers. If you know of anyone doing anything remarkable that would be great for this podcast, please get in touch with us. But for myself and from Zane, we will see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Thanks, Zane.